In the remote hollows of eastern Kentucky, where fog clings to ancient mountains like secrets to graves, there exists a family tree that doesn't branch. It spirals inward, twisting back on itself in ways that nature never intended. For 7 generations, the same surnames appear over and over again, married to each other, bearing children who carried the weight of their ancestors' choices in their very blood. What you're about to hear isn't folklore. It isn't legend. It's documented history that most would prefer to forget, a genealogical nightmare that spans 2 centuries and reveals what happens when isolation, tradition, and desperation collide in the shadows of Appalachia. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The year was 1820, and the mountains of eastern Kentucky were a world unto themselves. Here, in the maze of valleys and ridges that seemed to exist outside of time, families didn't just settle. They became trapped by geography, poverty, and a fierce independence that would prove both their strength and their curse. Among these early settlers were the Colts, a family whose name would become synonymous with one of the most disturbing genetic experiments in American history, though they never intended it as such. Samuel Colt arrived in these mountains with his wife Martha, seeking the promise of cheap land and freedom from the judgments of civilization. What they found was isolation so complete that the outside world might as well have ceased to exist. Their nearest neighbors were hours away on horseback, accessible only by treacherous mountain paths that became impassable in winter. In this cocoon of solitude, the Colts began to build their dynasty, unaware that they were laying a foundation for generations of genetic horror. Samuel and Martha had 7 children, and as these children grew to adulthood in the 1840s and 1850s, they faced a dilemma that would define their family's fate. Marriage required partners, but partners were scarce in these remote mountains. The few neighboring families were either too distant, too hostile, or already interrelated through previous unions. So, the Colt children began to look inward to each other and to their cousins. It started innocently enough, second cousins marrying, a practice not uncommon in rural communities of the era. But what began as necessity would evolve into something far more sinister. The first documented case of close inbreeding in the Colt family occurred in 1855, when James Colt married his first cousin, Elizabeth Colt. Their union produced 6 children, all of whom displayed what local doctors at the time described as peculiar constitutions, a euphemism for the genetic abnormalities that were already beginning to manifest. But the family, isolated from medical knowledge and driven by tradition, saw nothing wrong with this arrangement. In fact, they saw it as keeping their bloodline pure, preserving their mountain heritage from outside contamination. They had no understanding of genetics, no knowledge of the terrible price their children would pay for their choices. By the 1870s, the second generation of Colts had come of age, and the pattern established by their parents had become not just accepted, but expected. What had once been born of necessity was now tradition, as sacred and unquestioned as Sunday service or the planting of crops by the moon. The children of James and Elizabeth Colt, themselves the product of first cousin marriage, now faced their own matrimonial futures. And with options limited to their immediate family circle, they continued the cycle with a determination that bordered on religious fervor. Thomas Colt, son of James and Elizabeth, married his sister Mary in 1878. Their union was celebrated by the family as keeping their mountain bloodline strong, but the children born of this marriage told a different story. Of their 8 offspring, 3 died in infancy from mysterious ailments that local physicians couldn't identify or treat. The surviving 5 children displayed increasingly severe physical and mental abnormalities, clubfoot, cleft palates, and what the family euphemistically called slow thinking. Yet rather than questioning their matrimonial practices, the Colts doubled down, interpreting these challenges as tests of their faith and endurance. The isolation that had once protected the family from outside judgment now became a prison of ignorance. No doctors visited these remote hollows regularly. No government officials kept records of births or deaths. No social workers investigated the welfare of children. The Colts existed in a bubble of their own making, where their increasingly disturbing family structure went not just unnoticed, but unchallenged. They developed their own explanations for their children's ailments. Bad air from the mines, curses from neighboring families, the will of God, testing their resolve. Sarah Colt, daughter of Thomas and Mary, married her uncle Benjamin in